Right, welcome to the Kuadrant call. So we've got a couple of things in the agenda. If there's anything that you want to add now, go ahead and add that at the bottom of the list. Not in the backlog, but under the date. We'll get to that. I've got one just quick note, general sort of announcement, I guess. We're pretty close with Gateway APIs V1. MGC has been tested, at least by engineering. And I think we're pretty close with the Kuadrant operator as well. We're just waiting on a new build. Any update on that one, Didi? Maybe we're just waiting on a new build for the Kuadrant operator. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I just pushed to key, the release candidate 2. I shared with Peter. And I think like the only difference within the release candidate 1 was the fix for the reconciliation of the auth policy in the auth config. And the other stuff was just end-to-end tests, so probably nothing super important.
Okay, does that include the removal of the policy controller?
Yes, and I think that's also included in the release candidate 1, if I remember correctly.
The removal?
Yeah.
Yeah, removal, yeah.
Okay, great. Cool, okay, so the next release then that we're looking at, hopefully before the end of the year, this was part of the roadmap as well, which is to support Project Sail as a way to install and configure Istio-based gateways, and then integrate Kuadrant with that. So I know Adam has been working away on Project Sail, getting it working, and just before the call he mentioned he managed to get rate limiting working, and auth is already working, so good progress there. But one part of this that will emerge is, it's the first release where we'll start to see unified Kuadrant as well. At least in a standalone cluster. It won't be in the hub clusters yet, but we'll reintroduce the policy controller as part of this release. The reason for removing it originally was that like a lot of the docs and the quick starts use a hub and spoke as a single cluster, and that meant that we were ending up with 2 policy controllers being installed, which meant they were fighting each other for resources. So that wasn't ideal, and we didn't want to take on all the work of changing around the quick start to use a separate hub and spoke in this release. So as part of the next release, we'll look to update that quick start so that we end up with a hub and 2 individual spokes, which is the way that OCM gives it to you originally anyway. And we won't support like a shared hub spoke anymore. Instead, you can use a standalone cluster to use Kuadrant with DNS policy and TLS policy and all the different policies in a single cluster. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions on that. Okay, so making sense to everyone, I hope. Yeah, so basically we'll be dropping support for that single cluster as a hub and a spoke. Anything else as part of that? So I think we'll probably have some new docs. Some of them are already in progress, just around DNS policy and TLS policy in a single cluster, and how you can use that. So yeah, that's what's coming next. So next is Peter with the release process. So I took a look through this originally, Peter, before the call. I've added some responses, but we can go through each item and discuss and see, do the responses make sense? Do they answer your question? Is there more to ask? So yeah, let's go for that. So its first part is Kuadrant release composed of individual component releases that are released independently?
Yeah. Maybe I can even do an intro if you want.
Yeah, go for
this
it.
topic in general.
Yeah.
I would say that right now we as a QE treat Kuadrant as a one release, right, of all components together. But it seems like you guys are treating it more like individual components that are released independently, and then once they are released, they comprise the release, which is a small adjustment or a different perspective, but it changes, but it has effect on how it works and how we test things, how we do things, etc. So yeah, the first question I would like to ask is if it's Kuadrant release and everything is released at once, or if it's multiple small releases of individual components, which then do the compose the Kuadrant release.
Yeah. So my answer is, at least at the moment, the components can be released individually, and then we release a version of the Quadrant operator that pulls in the tested versions of those components, and they make up the Quadrant bundle, if you want to call it that. So that's my understanding of how that works right now. I guess like Autorino and limit store things can be used outside of Quadrant, right? So
I would actually like to maybe focus more on service protection and MGC. I would just bundle Autorino Limitator together. We agreed that they can have different life cycles. We do different. The process there is different, right? But I think this still debate is the same, even if we bundle it into service protection and MGC, right? The reason why this is actually what this changes is that if we treat it as a one release, and if everything is released at once, we get one build, then we test one build, right? The final configuration. However, if it is individually released, that's also fine, but we need to do the testing on the individual components and then on the whole thing. If you understand what I mean. Meaning if MGC releases first or is ready first, yes, we test MGC, but we test MGC with older Kuadrant version. And then when Kuadrant releases, the Kuadrant operator releases, we then test the new version of MGC because it's already released, and the new Kuadrant operator version. So basically there will be 2 rounds of testing, which is still completely fine. But that's kind of the reason why I'm bringing it up. Yagi?
When you say 2 rounds of testing, I imagine that doesn't necessarily mean twice as much testing, right? I suppose that one thing is testing, focusing on each individual component, and then maybe the integration of the whole thing and making sure that the pieces play well together.
That really much depends. It's usually not twice. It's like 1.5, right? There is something shared, but you are right. Context is different. In the terms of MGC and service protection, what I would imagine doing is just run against the docs. Meaning, the docs will install the old version of Kuadrant, right? The latest release. So we would be testing at basically a different configuration. Again, it's just for us one run of tests, so it shouldn't take long, as no testing should. But we would have to do the same run again because the deployment would change, right? We would have a new Kuadrant and the new MGC.
Okay, another question. If we so decide, could we only test, for example, Kuadrant as a whole, even though we are releasing the individual components separately, but we're just not focusing on testing them individually? Or do we really have to test those 2 things in separate, as you said before?
We would really like to test. If there is component release, same with, we don't do it for Autorino and Limitator now, we would like to do it in the future, right? If it's published, and we expect, if it's published, it should go through us. Basically, that's the general idea.
With that, because maybe it helps for later on tracking bugs and making sure that they relate to the component and not to the integration, or only because of good
Right.
practice.
In general, if it can be released as a component, the user can use it as a component, right? If we release only MGC, user can, if the user goes to the Kuadrant IO guide, he will install new MGC and old Kuadrant. So we should test that configuration before the user does, or get the hang of it, the configuration before he does.
Okay,
So that you're talking about the docs there, though, right? That's a bit different. So
Why? Or
well, like right now, the docs say release 0.1, right? But
Yeah.
MGC is finished, and we could potentially tag it release 0.2.
and if you
But-
did,
But the docs
That's the
docs
issue.
are no, the docs that are live would still say 0.1.
right. But we would, again, if we would test the docs before the release, we would use the branches, right? We would not expect it to be published, which would then get published. But if we test only MGC or test MGC before the Kuadrant operator is ready, it would mean that the docs would say release 0.2, right? Because it has been pushed and it's tested. But that if you go according to the doc, you will install new MGC, old Kuadrant, which is a different configuration than the final one. New Kuadrant and new Kuadrant operator, or new service protection, and new MGC. Sorry, my terminology is stupid. I need to say service protection more.
So why don't we just release? I might be being stupid here because it's late in the evening here, but why don't we just release the docs when
It's public.
when Quadrant is released?
Right? If we can do that. At that point, it would be one release. We wait until the full build is done, all the docs are done, and then release it at once. Can be done. No,
That's
I'm
fine.
just saying not happening right now,
I'd
or
say,
doesn't seem to be going that direction.
wouldn't it make sense to think of it as some components, they can actually live without Quadrant, like Limiador or Torino, and there it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to just have that. But the rest of it is just, we should see it as one.
Yeah,
Like, we should
one-
not get
100%,
different
yeah.
Old Quadrant, new MCG. That doesn't make sense to me. It's just complicating stuff for nothing.
I fully agree, Thomas. Like that would make sense. But at the same time, even if we want to treat MGC and Quadrant operator as having a little bit different life cycles, that's also fine with me. I think just we need to agree on what's the thing, right? And that's it. What the actual thing is.
Yeah, so I can see like the MGC ending up with a slightly different life cycle to the Quadrant operator in the future, right? Because we've separated out the policy controller from the actual MGC. The MGC might not need like as many updates as has been happening because all the features have been around policy, which is all now in as part of like the policy controller, which we want to ship as part of the Quadrant operator. So in a future release, you would get a new version of Quadrant operator, which would also ship with it the new version of policy controller. And so you would get all of those policies in one release, right? So in that situation, you would have the old version of MGC with the new version of Quadrant operator.
I would say that's not an issue, because it would be an issue if we want to release MGC more often than Quadrant operator. Right?
Yeah, so
basically what this comes down to is, do we want to always release MGC with the whole Quadrant, or do we want to release it outside of it as well?
I think it's reasonable to be able to release MGC outside of it, because MGC will be an integration with OCM, right? So it's not tied into like all the policy stuff that Quadrant operator is offering. So I think I see your point, which is when we release MGC, it's test with the current version of Quadrant. But if we release a new version of Quadrant, we would then need to just basically resanity check MGC is working with that version of the service protection. Right?
Yeah. So yeah, based on this, I think, like I said, if we agree that we treat it as components, right, and they can all release individually, then we do through multiple release processes, right, for each component, and then the whole thing. Right, the whole thing might be a lot shorter now, right, but still, it's gonna be multiple processes for each component individually. Actually, in that regard, right, Autorino and Limitador, I think, work according to the same process. If we treat everything as a component, Autorino limitador would probably follow the same one, right?
Yeah.
Does it make sense, Guy? And
Well, I suppose, yeah.
right. Okay. Then we go to the second point. I was there, where we have this written. Yeah, we don't, as far as I. Everybody hates really doing early releases. I fully understand it. Then. Right, I believe, yes, we have release steps for Autorino and Autorino operator, but there is nothing for Kuadrant, so I would suggest writing an RFC for that, where it's like in few steps, like it shouldn't be a big RFC, it's just few steps. This is what we do, and clear as it can be, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, like we need the same thing for MGC. So
yeah, I think it should be for Kuadrant and for every component the same.
yeah, so like because the policy controllers, like because unified quadrant kind of starting to happen, I think this makes it a lot simpler, right? Because the policy gets released as a single component. The policy controller is basically a combination of quadrant operator and the policy controller. Eventually, it may just be the quadrant operator, right? Once they fully merge, but it's just that one release, right? Which is the policy component, and then you have the gateway integration, which is a separate component. So I think I think that makes sense. What you're saying is to have a release process for each component.
Doesn't it?
Sorry about that.
I believe it should be the same, hopefully, to make it. Sorry, you obviously don't agree.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible for all release process to be the same, right? I mean, the components are different. Some components are operators, while others are not. Some involve different steps, in the release.
Oh.
Some contain subcomponents, others do not. So they would differ for sure.
Yeah, I think the scoping is very important, and I didn't mention it, so I'm sorry for that. The scoping is high-level steps. High-level steps meaning we generate RC, it goes through QE, then we release docs, create GitHub release, or release it everywhere else. Then we are done, right? That's that's basically the high level, just a few steps I would like to get from it, and not how we do CI/CD, which is already handled by Didi's PR. Didi, you also have your hands up.
Yeah, so I'm the bringer of good news, at least to one point, that my RFC is also including, and actually started from that step of including the current process as much detail as I can. It includes the notes from that Guy posted on the document for releasing the Autorino and Autorino operator, and it does the same for the limitador and limitador operator, that they're like quite different from Autorino's, for the WASM shim and the Kuadrant operator as well. So at the moment, it is all the information is there. I need to probably make it a bit more eye candy and polish it a bit, but it is there. So I invite anyone, if they want to take a look at least at the current process, it is detailed in the RFC I've linked in the document.
Yeah, by the way, I love your PR, it's really great. However, I think it handles like different level of this issue, right? Your PR goes into detail how we implement that process. What I would like is like 5 steps, how we release like in high level, a few points basically. It can be also included in your PR, but the PR is already really huge. So only thing I worry is it could get lost.
Yeah, well, of course that makes sense. Maybe we can actually think about the ideas that I have for that particular one. We could split it if that.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Basically, I would say the agreement is we should have it in some RFC, and ideally not have as many, if that would be possible.
Okay.
Thomas?
Yeah, I'm just slightly worried that we're creating a whole, ideally it's just one step process. Like especially upstream, I would say. I'm taking a bit of an extreme position maybe here, but like I don't mind shipping bugs upstream. Really, like the tests should run that are there, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's already what we
I
agreed.
don't want us to get into a place
Yeah.
that we have something very complex, and like we want to get out of this place where releasing is actually something to talk about.
I would love it as well. But like I said, I brought this up because we clearly were not on the same page. And what I would like to get from the RFC are like 5 steps. With, for example, this is when QE tests, and this is what we do after it, and this is what we do before it. Like 5 steps, and that's it.
That's basically the aim and the resolution of the RFC, the proposition of the RFC. At this particular moment, it's just like the exploration and showing the current process. But yeah, of course, like ideally, we're going to have like the UX of that release process going to be seamless for all of us, regarding of if it's development, QE, or we are actually building a release, issuing a release. Sorry.
Yeah, correct. You believe you were next.
I just wanted to clarify what you mean by a set of steps. So when you mean a set of steps, you mean like to create a release branch, publish the image, things like that?
Yeah, create a branch. I don't care how, right? Or create.
Yeah. I'm just coming up with
build.
like an example of the steps you're talking about.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
create a branch, create a tag, create, update the docs with the branch. That kind of set of steps.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of high level of steps.
Okay.
Alex?
Yeah, I guess I sort of sit in between like 2 things I'm hearing. I'm very much with Thomas there. I think it should be sort of a one-step thing. I think it's how you label it, right? So I think you mentioned it. I think we would need some. I don't think it was really a requirement so far, but maybe now's the time to effectively release RCs, like release candidates, right? And a release candidate is also what then QE or whomever wants to test that. It's something there. I hate making that split, but let's say where people that worked on features, to not call them engineering, right, are confident that this is something usable, right? And then we go test it out to actually be usable, where it's QE or let's say more courageous, like open source uses or whatever, it's fine, right? And that's the one, I think in my head, the way I think about sort of the one-click release, right? Being able to do this very often. And then if you need to do 10 RCs before you actually have something that's of quality, then in my head, it's again the system trying to tell you something about something being broken. That's what we need to look into. But just do the thing, like put it out there, and at some point you do your non-RC or -GA or whatever, if we want to have some kind of other blessing, then that's fine. But I think the goal that I think I heard Thomas say, like it should be a no-brainer to get anything out, and leaking more stuff into a waterfall thing that takes forever. Yeah, we need blessing from 5 departments. Like we shouldn't suffer from that upstream.
So quick question, are people from QA on this meeting?
Yes, that's me.
Okay, good.
And there are more of us, right? But yeah, I'm the one talking. Yeah.
Like I'm sort of a big fan of having QE participate in the upstream development, and kind of like it depends how many guys you have, right? Like, are you guys going to be the ones implementing all the integration tests and all this kind of stuff? Or are you guys going to have the upstream do the integration test? Like, because one way to look at it is if you don't have enough people, you just sort of help review and make sure there's enough adequate coverage, right, on all issues, right? But so the idea being is, like, a feature shouldn't be done until there's proper testing for it, because how the hell do you know if it works? So if you have automated upstream tests for everything, then if it passes automated tests, you're fine, right?
Yeah. What you mentioned. So first, yes, we will be the one developing the integration, the end-to-end test, and we should be responsible for those. We have currently our own test suite, which does that, which is also public.
So I guess the question is, Are we okay holding up saying things are done? Like, are you guys going to work in real time with the features
Yeah.
to make sure that the tests are in for the features as they're getting developed?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we are trying to do. When we say we would like to test it, it means we would like to have a look before it's released, and we wouldn't want to take more than 3 days.
No,
to
I'm
see it.
saying, I'm basically
just-
saying a PR shouldn't be merged until there's adequate testing for it. So like
That's-
anything that goes into main it should like ideally main's always ready for release because it all went in with proper testing.
That's the goal. I don't think we are closing on that. That requires much more stuff to be done first.
Like what?
But currently, I would say that we get weekly builds, which I believe are right now, again, subject to be changed. The way how the things are delivered to QE, who then we develop.
So what's
tests for it.
stopping us from having that model right now, where we say everything that goes into main has already been tested?
The scope of the everything that goes to main. Imagine a feature A, right? Feature A is usually it can be scattered across 5 different components, and until those 5 PRs are merged, the feature won't work.
Yeah, but then each one can be individually be tested, right?
Well,
Yeah, and they went in, they're fine.
that's different level testing than what we usually do. This would be component level testing, right? You test each component separately, not caring about the rest.
Yeah, and the
This
bigger
PR
feature
should
isn't
be-
there, right? The bigger feature isn't complete until all 5 are in there, right?
Right. So we cannot. So what we are interested in is the big feature. So testing
I
those
think you guys should be
individual.
interested in the small features too. I think it all matters. It all needs the right testing, right?
I would say not all the features are necessarily available to users, right? Many of the PRs
Yeah,
are
I agree.
internal
I
ones.
agree with that. Yeah, you can
So-
put stuff behind feature flags and whatnot, or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but just doesn't need to be exposed right now, right? Only when everything is done. For example, the means of exposing it might be in different component because we are working with operators across different components.
So like, let's imagine we don't even we hold up the documentation, we don't expose it, or we put it behind a feature flag. When we're ready to expose it and bring it into main, like, okay, now this is here, like that would go in with integration tests that verify it all works together.
That would
So
mean
that,
we would
like
have
it
to
all,
get.
like I'm saying, like main should always be in pretty good shape. Like it
Uh,
should have a bunch of tests, everything goes in.
Okay, what's a pretty good shape when there is integration of like 5 different components? So main should always work with every other main.
So like all that component stuff is easy to test because it's all in the code base. I think the hardest things to test that basically like isn't those cases, isn't integrating features. The hardest stuff to do is testing on weird environments. Does it work on a Hypershift? Does it work on Azure? Does it all work the same? Like those are the hard ones that are harder to do that CI can't do, right? CI can't do a good job with that. So, but I'm saying like all these features, like they should be testable upstream in CI.
That really much depends on the feature and the scope, I would say right now.
I would say make this the norm, and all these other weird exceptional cases are exceptions. We should be on the mindset of if it goes into main, it's got adequate testing. And if you guys don't, if you guys see a PR go in and you guys feel like, oh, there's not enough integration tests, then you should guys basically comment on that PR and say, this needs more integration testing or more of this type of testing. Like, we don't think there's enough coverage before it goes into main. Like, I think that's QE's role too. And you could say, hey, developer, you need to create unit tests for this or something, right?
Right, but that's, I need to better way of explaining it. I can say this way. I would say it's currently unrealistic to do this. There is not enough people
That's the first question I asked you.
Well, we have enough.
And so, like, if you guys don't have enough people, then I think you guys should have a supervisory role where you guys are reviewing PRs, not actually developing the testing, so that you guys don't hold up the PR. Like you basically just tell the developers, hey, we need this type of test.
No, there is a scoping issue right now, because what you are saying works for individual components, but Kuadrant is better than some of its parts because
Yes.
there is integration. So what
Yeah.
we are doing, what we are developing tests for, are end-to-end integration tests for the whole thing.
Yes, those are important too.
That's currently scoping of what we are as a QE are trying to do, which is different from component level testing that you suggest.
But even that integration suite, whatever, it should be something that developers participate in too.
Oh,
Right.
Agree.
Yeah.
That I can fully agree with. I'm just saying that testing individual PRs does not really help us in the integration and end-to-end scheme of things.
Yeah. It depends if you bring in an integration test into your component, right? Like I know components that do integration tests, but that's
Yeah, depends on what kind of integration you need to do. What is the boundaries you set it? Your test phases in. Okay, I think we can invite others into the discussion because I think
Okay.
they've been holding it for too long. Go on, Greg.
So each in at least with like MGC and things like that, those components have unit test coverage and integration tests, and in the PRs, if there's not tests, it's called out, or there should be, and there are integration tests there that start up the controller, run it against an etc.d, execute the APIs, and then we even have a very basic end-to-end test that deploys the thing into a cluster, natural Kubernetes cluster, and runs like a basic happy test, right? Like what we actually test when we do the release is we run through the docs for that component just to make sure that the docs still make sense. That does happen also. If it should also happen at PR time, but it's just a sanity check to say like, yeah, all these docs still make sense. So I would say we do some of that, and what the QE team have is an end-to-end test suite that's more than just the happy path that's in like, well, at least in the MGC component. I can't really speak for every other component. So like what we have already sort of said is the automated tests that are in each component should be enough, right? And plus documentation tests.
I'm gonna go as far to say it's a bad pattern to have an integration suite that's not part of the components. Why?
Well, how can
Why?
integration
Because here's the
suite-
thing. Because you can, like every developer, like if I'm working on my component, I want to have inside my project that, you know, something I just run that runs that tests my component, integrating with everything else it needs to integrate with.
But integration test is more than just testing one component with everything. It's testing everything together. Where should the suite live?
Yes.
That's it. It's the definition, but I call that like end-to-end is for that, right?
Yeah. End-to-end integration.
Okay.
But like every component could have their own end-to-end integration test within it. And then that way we know it's been integrated with the other components. Like every time you do a PR, it's been integrated.
Yes and no. When you run an PR, I would say you generally do not want to do the full suite of testing, because full suite testing, in at least my eyes, consists of running it across different environments.
So that's
kind of
I'm not saying that,
unrealistic
like,
to do
that's,
on each
I agree.
PR,
We will not
right?
want to do environmental testing. We don't want to do that. Okay.
Right.
All right. I
But-
just want to test that it works with the other components. Like I'm not going to do all the environment variation. That's a different problem. And I think that's fine. But like if I break an API for another component, I need to know about it before that PR goes in. I can't wait for you guys to tell me a week later that something broke.
Yeah, I believe it's perfectly realistic to include our test suite in the CI/CD pipeline for every component, right? What I don't think it's realistic to split the test suite across multiple different components.
Yeah, I mean, all we need is an image, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we provide an image. Right now, there is a disclaimer, right? We don't really, it's suited for OpenShift, right? We need to do some modifications to be able to run on kind or whatevs, but that's implementation detail that doesn't stop us.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I agree. If that's what you kind of imagine or would like to see, yeah, that's possible, and we would like to get close to it.
And I like what I've seen with, we've talked about this, Peter, right, in the
Yeah.
past, right? So like what we've seen with Kubernetes, for instance, is like you can say like ready to test, or you can say like needs this type of testing, right? So that like if you're updating a doc or you're updating like something trivial, like you don't want to have to execute the entire suite for that, right? So you might be able to flag that and say doesn't need whatever end-to-end integration testing, right? But yeah, like once we can, if we can get an image that will execute, that we can execute as part of a PR, optionally execute as part of PR, I think that's a great step forward.
Yeah.
There is already, I would say quite a lot of unit and integration tests and basic end-to-end tests in a few of the components. So.
Like the number one thing, if we are gonna go down a shared end-to-end or integration test kind of thing, like one, it needs to be relatively fast and scale, like it can scale like in parallel, like all tests run in parallel. Number one, right? Bonus points if you can run it on multiple workers at one time, but that's probably too advanced. Just parallel is probably pretty good. The other one is being able to select a subset of tests, like classify, like, oh, these tests use this component, right? So then when this component, like I make a PR for this component, I just want to run the test that have, touched that component. That's the other part.
Yeah, I fully agree, right? What you said. We need to be, that's also all the things that our test suite aims to do. Doesn't mean it does that right now awesomely, right? But yeah, we want to do all of those things. We can do most of those things. And yeah, I fully agree. We should have subsetted tests. We should be able to run subsetted tests on different environments, right? On different PRs based on what the complexity we require. And yeah, like you said, we don't need to run all of the tests for everything. Yeah. So I agree with the goal overall. Just not, I would say we are not there yet, but we are working towards it.
Which is a good component to maybe.
Yeah.
It's been sorry, Guy.
Yeah, sorry, you've been overlooked for so long.
It's okay. Before we change topics, so I have a different opinion on holding the PR to merge it until it's completely tested and everything, right? Including for individual components. I understand that, I think it was said here that that would be desirable or even ideal. And personally, I believe that it's actually the opposite of ideal. I think that is part of a vision where main branch is considered to be always stable and feature complete. And neither that is the current state of things, and nor I think it should be. I think it does not have to be that way. If you are looking for something that is stable and feature complete, you should go with the release version and not main branch.
So I don't think, like, I think stable is important, but it doesn't have to be feature complete.
Yeah, I would say it should not break, right?
Exactly. Like, here's
Yeah.
the thing: like, once you start working in a team bigger than, let's say, 2, it's super important that somebody else gets your thing and can have some confidence that his changes aren't breaking your shit that he doesn't understand. And that's why I say, like, testing is super important. Like, once a team gets big enough, like it should almost be a requirement that, hey, if you care about your code, you wrote a test to make sure nobody else broke your shit. You know what I'm saying? Now, feature complete, I don't think that's important. Like, that's a whole nother thing. Like, you can have a bunch of feature flags and disable stuff, because it's in progress. But the part, the in progress stuff does have some testing, make sure nobody else breaks your stuff that's in progress. That's it.
To be fair, we've been reasonably disciplined about making sure we have unit testing and even some level of integration testing, right, for the features we develop. And also documentation. That's also true for documentation. I think most of the PRs I've been seeing so far that also include some documentation. So regarding that, I think it's fine. So we're mainly talking about that extra layer of testing that goes on top of that, which is usually more, either it provides a different perspective on testing, or it's mainly about integrating components, right? Mainly the things that we have in the test suite repo right now. So I think that should not be part of the pull request at all, right? I mean, does not have to be. And I'm totally in favor of, if it comes to that, adding some feature switches, right? Feature flags. I think that's fine. But even without that, right, I think it's totally reasonable that occasionally we will have things merged to main. They are just not complete, and they will not break, but they are neither in a state that they can be tested yet, right? And so far, we've been able to manage merging features and merging changes to main branch to a point that we can at some point just cut a release and say, hey, let's just branch out of main and we can cut. I understand that there's some other cases, different teams where they cannot work like that, right? They usually need to fork a release branch and work on the release branch. Otherwise, it becomes too messy, to separate what should be should make for the next release and what shouldn't, right? But that's not our current state. So far, we've been able to manage, all the things that we merge into main, including sometimes, if needed, if that's not meant for the next release, okay, let's hold that for a moment. It's fine. Cut the release and then we merge it. I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, I think there's general agreement there, Guy. So, I don't think we should break main. I think main should work, right? But things not being, like Hiram said, like things not being feature complete. I think that's fine. What I would say about the end-to-end test is, I'm a big subscriber to lots of unit tests. Somewhat, I think it's called the Google testing pyramid or something. I can't remember, but basically lots of unit tests, slightly less integration tests, and then a lot less end-to-end tests, right? Because end-to-end tests it's about cost, right? Like end-to-end tests are expensive to maintain, they're expensive to run. So you want to have high impact end-to-end tests, but less of them. More integration. When I say integration tests, I mean things that execute inside the component, running the component as standalone, into making sure that it works with whatever it needs, like XZRD or database or whatever. And then lots of unit tests, right? So like that, the unit test and integration test, I think, should definitely be part of like the PR approval process. But the end-to-end test, I think if we're in a place where, so I've got a note here, right, in the thing. I think if we can shift QE involvement left a little bit, so that when the epic is being defined, we identify at that point, does this actually need a new end-to-end test in it, right? Or is it already covered and therefore doesn't need an end-to-end test involved, right? So if we can shift QE into working alongside us when we're defining those epics and prioritizing and refining those epics, then we should be able to have confidence that when we're merging whatever set of features, that the end-to-end test case is already covered, right? It's already there, or it's not covered yet, but it's there's an issue here and it's being worked on, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I agree. Right. Right now, I would say it would be more likely being worked on, being done later than DPR, because unless you have the thing that we can try it on, it's not going to be as great. Yeah, that's basically the missing piece right now. Is to be done with the end-to-end test for the feature, we need to have a build with that feature, which is a discussion different, that's dealt with different, right? That's the build discussion.
Yeah. So, but I would really like to get to a point where we could run those tests that you have as part of the PR if we wanted to, right?
Agree, 100%. Fully agree.
Maybe do we need an epic, a QE epic around that we can like track as part of a release that we get to the point with one of the components at least that we can do that?
Yeah, I would actually say that currently we have the biggest and best coverage for Autorino. We can run it also as a standalone. Standalone is a little on the nose because we run it as with Autorino operator, right? That's the distinction. But I believe we could update it. But I think we would be able to run Autorino specific tests only, and we have enough of them to provide reasonable amount of coverage in a short period of time. So that would be, in my eyes, the good start point if you wanted to do that.
Okay, so maybe this also needs like perhaps we do a POC there with Autorino, or I don't know.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a few bit of work on our side, right? For example, we don't support running on Kind because that's where the environment would be executed, right? We would need to do a lot of quirks, but I believe it's a thing pursuing on, and I would even suggest we create an epic somewhere, probably in architectures. There should be all epics to track.
Yeah, because I also think it would be important to say, like I said before, right? I don't need this, right? Or like what we got mileage out of in previous projects was that idea of a happy path. So basically the happy path always executes. And then if you need something additional, there's like basically a set of categorizations of tests. And you can say, well, happy path always runs, but like I need auth policy to run, just as an example, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we went like way off track here.
Yeah, we basically stumbled onto a completely different topic. I believe that topic we might revisit it someday later at other community call. I believe we are going to return to that topic, and I would definitely mark it somewhere that we need to do that topic. But since we have 10 minutes left, I would just quickly finish the previous one, if that's okay. It should be, pretty simple. I think everything else is kind of answered or agreed upon. And I would say the next steps are including those few steps, what happens, how we release things into the DSPR or into some RFC. And then lead the discussion there. Once we have the finalized, once we have a proposal, then we can comment on it and approve it or reject it as we see fit. And that's everything from me.
Okay, so what are our action points out of all this? What are we going to do? What are we going to do to improve this?
Yeah, exactly. So we need to document it somewhere. We need to document it in some RFC. I would say that's the next step. Or suggest a new process from an RFC.
The release process.
Yeah. Just those few steps. Like I said, the high-level steps we mentioned. I believe it would be great if they were written somewhere.
So what could Didi roll that into his as like TLDR? Here's the steps that we take, right? Then like here's the expansive bit below, right? Didi, what do you think? And it's sort of a generic thing, right? It's like we create a release branch, we create a tag, we have an image in Quay, we have the docs ready. Like, is that right?
Exactly.
Like, so do you think we could do that, Didi, or do we feel like it's too nebulous?
No, I mean, actually, if it's needed and it's going to be, easier to follow and everything, I could put it there as well. Of course, at the moment, the documentation steps and everything else, like the release, is not there because we don't have kind of a process that we apply. So at the moment, it's only kind of like the steps needed and in the order needed of all components, in particular the ones in service protection. But yeah, I mean, like if when we put the effort to the new process, of course, the idea would be to cover not only the technical aspects of it, but also the documentation and possibly communication to community and other extra that could be beneficial, at least for the entire project.
So, like, if we have the service protection release steps, you can ping me on that, and I can review for MGC and see if there's anything different there.
Okay, good.
And then, like, we'll have some alignment.
Good. At the moment, if you go to that pull request, it's going to be from the operand until Kuadrant operator. So at the moment, it's actually reviewable, at least the current process.
Cool. Okay. And the other thing is Peter, you're going to create an epic around running the end-to-end tests in a kind environment being executed by a component like Ultrino.
Yeah.
Optionally executed. Okay. All right. Great. All right, I guess we can leave it there then. That was a long discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.